Welcome to the My Friend the Friar podcast, and thanks for listening. If you like My Friend the Friar and want to support us, please consider subscribing or following us if you haven't already done so. And if you found us on YouTube, then don't forget to click the notification bell when you subscribe so you'll be notified of new episodes when they release. Thanks again, and God bless. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me and my friend the Friar, Father Stephen Sanchez. Discalced karma. Oh, I messed it up. No. I had like a streak going for I don't know how many episodes I didn't mess it up.
What am I?
A discalced Carmelite priest. Oh, I have to go practice it now over and over and over again. Dang it. So close. All right. Good afternoon, Father.
Good afternoon. In 108-degree weather.
Yeah. So we're still together. We're still in person. We might have some funny sounding audio as we just get to hang out in person. So hopefully it sounds not too bad. Not too bad. So we're talking about, and we don't even remember why we're talking about this, but somebody had asked, and I thought it was interesting enough at some point in time to bring it up. The difference, well, I shouldn't even say difference. We're going to talk about spirit and soul and just the Catholic understanding of that. Because we're not like a spirit that is animating our robotic body, right? I'm not really just my spirit. I am equally spirit and soul. So we're going to dive into all that.
And body.
I'm sorry. I'm equally soul and body. Body and soul. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah. Both. Both and. It's a great Catholic both and situation.
Yes. And I don't remember why this subject came up either. And we're trying to remember what brought this up. But anyway, the whole topic of spirit and soul. It's a little complicated because it depends who's using the terms and what are they talking about, whether it's, outside of belief inside the church, and even inside the church, there's been a shifting understanding of what the spirit and soul is about. The previous episode we talked about the supernatural reality of the human person, right? And part of this supernatural reality is that we have a soul. And some people would say we have a spirit, and some people would say that we have a soul within our spirit. And so things get a little, that's a little bit outside my way of thinking about things. So I want to say first that universally, humanity, as it developed, grew and became more civilized and came to acknowledge the difference between a sentient and non-sentient being, between animate and non-animate creatures. This idea started to develop in terms of what is the difference between an animate creature and an inanimate creature, and what is the difference between me and another animate creature, right? As it pondered these differences, humanity, there developed a unanimous view that the human person is more than a material being. The nature of this otherness in us was not clearly understood. We have to remind ourselves that we can only use our cultural language, experience, and symbols in our attempts to speak to others of such things. So humanity's first attempt at addressing this acknowledgement were tied to mythic stories, which later evolved into what we would call a spiritual or religious understanding of this otherness of ours, this other ingredient, this other part of who we are.
Yeah. Something that I think is cool about that, thinking of Native American spirituality, is the personification of so many different, like Mother Earth.
Yeah.
Right. And that's probably not too uncommon for indigenous peoples around the world.
Correct.
But it's right. It's what you're saying. It's that realization of otherness. There's something bigger than just the rock is the rock. That's the spirit of the rock, or the spirit of the tree, the spirit of the mountain, the spirit of the ocean. Right? There's something, and I wonder if it's humanity wrestling with their own otherness, where they try to put it onto something else so that they can try to make sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if the sea is tumultuous, right. They pick a certain trait and apply it to whatever the nurturing mother.
Something that is awe-inspiring, or something that causes wonder. Right. So whether it's fire, or whether it's storms or water or whatever it might be, right? And the Catechism, I think we talked about this when we talked about the first segment of the Catechism, talks about how humanity is naturally religious. There is this, because of who we are.
Memory, echo.
Because of who we are and because of our supernatural being, we recognize and are trying to enunciate that thing that we experience, and the only way we can manifest it or enunciate it is by seeing that supernaturalness in the rising of the sun, or the falling of the rain, or the stars, or whatever it might be, right? So that is part of that, right? That we tend to reflect upon things, and that's part of that reflection, is that supernatural being part of us, right?
Yeah, and that's a funny kind of thing, because your perspective changes the outcome of that thought, right? So the person who's looking for meaning, person who's looking for something bigger, they say that, well, look at the beauty and the intricacy and the complication of all creation and the patterns and all this. You see a building and you can intuit that there is a builder, right? So you start looking for something bigger. So therefore, there must be this thing called God,
right?
And if you're an atheist, because of which, of course, broad brushstrokes, just like talking about non-Catholic Christians, you have. Will look at humanity trying to find meaning when the meaning is just the existence that's staring them in the face. And it's not God. It's just called matter or something, right? The
Accident.
Big Bang. Yeah. Really interesting.
Yeah. I think for us, and then our concern then is with the idea of spirit, soul, supernatural life, as understood within our Judeo-Christian tradition, that is, within our own religious understanding. This understanding has been and continues to be, as we've spoken in some other episodes, influenced by philosophical views. But that's not our focus. We're talking about our Catholic understanding of spirit, soul.
Yeah, because we have to. We're constantly moving toward that deeper self-understanding.
Correct.
Right. Who I am, what I am, what does that mean?
Right. Yeah. And again, it is part of the supernatural life, the development of that supernatural life, the development of my spirit, of my soul, the education, the formation of that aspect of my being, right? Just as it is the aspect of my physical being. The concept then of spirit is ancient. And as we said earlier, it's developed over time. It was originally tied to the physical life breath of a person. In ancient culture, in the Indian continent, in Sanskrit, it is called the Atman, Atman, the Atman, which developed into the concept of the life principle of the universe, which, according to their mythology, theology, is issues from Brahman, which is the ultimate God, the ultimate deity, right? That issues forth all life. And in Hebrew, it is called ruach. And ruach is breath, which came to be understood as the life-giving breath of God. In Greek, we still have this breath idea. In Greek, it is called pneuma, which was understood to be the vital or creative force of a person, which in Christianity came to be understood as the Holy Spirit or the breath of God. So it's interesting here then that life, the life breath, life is somehow connected to this otherness, this ultimate otherness, right? Whether it's the Hebrew understanding of the Ruah, of God's breath, of Yahweh, or the Greek understanding of pneuma, or the Sanskrit understanding of Atman, that there's somehow like life comes to us from something outside of ourselves, which is an interesting kind of a universal aspect or understanding of what that life force is. So, for us within our Judeo-Christian tradition in the Old Testament, the Ruah is seen as breath, and breath signifies life, which includes spirit, mind, and life itself. It is also connected to nephesh, or soul, which was understood to be the seat of emotions and the self. Because they observed that one's breath changed when a person was affected by emotions, angry, upset, anxious, sad, tired. Yeah. They concluded then that the breath force must be the source or the seat of emotions. Right? So that was their understanding. So then it followed then that if God is the ultimate source of all life, it is He who gives us a share in His life breath, which is the source of our animate existence. Of course, as the cultures develop and capacity develops, it takes time for the thought to develop fully. At first, the question was, what happens to the just when they die? The implication being that there is some part of us that continues to exist, but we just don't know what that is and how that is. I think that it was in our episode on sanctity that we touched upon this subject as well, the development of the understanding of the soul and the resurrection of the just and how one lived on in God's memory. So we touched a little bit on that.
Yeah, that's a good throwback. Go listen to some of those old episodes. I think it was one of the sanctity ones because we're talking about the development of justice and
okay.
And
okay, I don't remember now.
Yeah,
it was a long time ago.
I know, so long.
So, but the word ruach is never used in reference to immaterial entities like angels, malak, or ghosts, shed, right? So there's something there. They're making a distinction between the life breath and then the supernatural entity of angelic being, right? Or someone that's departed, like for example, when they call up the soul of Saul, right? The prophet Saul. So they're not using ruach; they're using these other words. There's a distinction that they're making, which is again interesting that there is a distinction, right? There is somehow intuitively that there is those are different things.
Yeah. So that's the I guess the distinction between spirit and soul,
right?
And then you have your body,
right?
So that is interesting. Why
would they?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wonder. I don't know. I wonder what the implications are of that. I don't know.
You'd have to ask some biblical scholar that specializes in the Old Testament understanding of this exactly. Ruah.
Yeah. Because
soul,
do we see
spirit.
any of that in the New Testament?
It's different in the New Testament because in the New Testament it's Greek, right? We go from Hebrew to Greek, right? A different understanding, different mentality, different things, right? So again, this change in the world. So then, outside the developments and influences from other cultures, begins to influence. I should say, outside influences begin to shape the thought and the consideration of Old Testament or Hebrew theology and spirituality. So Persian and Greek culture contributed to the development of the thought within Judaism concerning spirit and spirits. The ruah, and then
like ghosts.
Yeah. Or demons or fallen angels or angelic beings, right?
So the way that angels didn't have a spirit,
because they're spiritual beings.
Yeah. So then, I guess they can't have a ghost either. But would they use the same kind of language?
Different. It's what's interesting.
So even if it's a ghost or an angel,
how to make that distinction?
That's so weird.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Let's not nerd out, okay?
Yeah.
Let's keep this under an hour. So in the Book of Wisdom, we see wisdom presented as an immaterial reality that can influence and be present in the spirit of man. God is seen as the Lord of spirits. And later, this understanding of wisdom becomes synonymous with the covenant, implying that wisdom resides in the observance of a covenantal life. So wisdom becomes personified. And so even the law, the covenant, then becomes personified. The law becomes wisdom. And God as somehow imparting this spirit, that there is the ruah, there's life, and now there's this other thing that's called wisdom that becomes personified and that he shares and gives to people, right?
Isn't wisdom in the Book of Wisdom personified as the feminine?
Yes.
I always thought that was really interesting too.
Yeah.
Okay, try not to geek out. This is so interesting to me. It's so interesting.
And so at that point in the Old Testament, as wisdom is personified, and it is feminized, it is feminine, but it's also considered covenantal life. The relationship between Israel and God is personified as wisdom. Wisdom is to live the covenant, right? And that's how it begins to make itself more present, right?
It seems very prefiguring of the church being the bride of Christ.
Yes, yeah, and that's what we would see it as. Yeah. We would see that it's a typology. So moving to the New Testament, in the New Testament, the Spirit is the principle of life and continues to exist after the physical death of the person. Okay, here we're getting a little bit more influenced by the Greek culture. So remember that this was a recent development during the time of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we go back to the Sadducees, who did not accept the teaching of a resurrection, whereas the Pharisees did. At first, the idea of the resurrection of the just was understood to mean only those who had died for the faith. Later, it was understood to reference all those whom God considered just, and goes back to the whole idea of the theology of sanctification that we did in that episode on that. So you can go back and find that if you want something a little bit more to cover that. So during the time of Jesus, his earthly ministry, the Spirit was understood to be the center of feelings and attitudes. At times, spirit and soul were used interchangeably. And this is where confusion comes, right? Using two different words to try to refer to the same thing, and that's why things get confused. The soul was considered to be part of the spirit and was considered to be the seat of the person's unique personality, or we would, in the Greek idea of the persona, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the psyche,
Mm-hmm.
right? Paul's distinction between pneuma and psyche is a bit confusing. And we'll leave it to the experts to figure that part out, because there's a lot of commentaries and commentators on Paul who still are trying to figure that one out.
Yeah. And he was a Pharisee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he would have believed in...
The resurrection.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even prior to Jesus, he would have had that belief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In resurrection, in angels. And remember, that's how he got out of a trial, because the Pharisees...
Oh, yeah. He got them arguing
arguing amongst themselves about, what if a spirit appeared to him or an angel appeared to him? So we can't say... So, yeah.
That crafty Paul.
Yep. So Paul contrasts spirit and flesh as well as spirit and law. And in Paul, he means law understands the Mosaic law, right? So in Paul's understanding, the law can only help you distinguish between right and wrong, but it cannot do more than that. It can only tell you what's right and wrong. But the Spirit, and Paul's understand this to be the Spirit of Christ, the risen Christ, or the Holy Spirit, gives us the capacity to be righteous or just. Going back to the episode we talked on justice, right?
Mm-hmm.
It gives us the capacity to be righteous or just, to act righteously and justly. The law kills by making the person aware of sin, what's right and what's wrong, but it is only the Spirit that sets us free. Okay. So the Spirit of God, that is the Holy Spirit, is the source then of a new creation and the fulfillment of the Old Testament promise of the new covenant written in the heart of the believers. Okay? That prophetic utterance. So now, the concept of soul in the Christian tradition as spiritual, created by God and infused at conception, is an understanding that developed over time. Bear with me for a minute as I read to you a small but dense quote from an article on the soul by Elmar Klinger.
Buckle up.
Buckle up. The doctrine of soul is an expression of man's self-understanding in general, is part of the subject matter of general anthropology, right? The study of man, mankind, humanity. Here it means within the framework of a comprehensive notion of man, the constitutive element by which human existence is capable, by nature, of attaining selfhood. Okay. The constitutive element by which human existence is capable, by nature, of attaining selfhood. If freedom, decision, responsibility, and knowledge are essential determinations of man, so that he not merely has his freedom and consciousness, but actually is these acts, so that man is freedom and consciousness to determine himself, right? Which goes beyond any actual exercise of them, then his nature must in itself make his basic activity possible. The soul is human nature in its self-awareness, and hence the primary force of the subjectivity. We'll come back to this in a minute. Let me finish this quote. It is the substance of man. Man is what he makes of himself, and his being is what he could really become. Personal development, the history of the soul, is itself a fundamental process. The soul itself is not man. It is one of the principles of being. It is substantial in character. Now here, what he's getting at is my soul is a way in which I as a human person, or we as human persons, it's in my self-understanding that I have a soul. Again, going back to this whole idea of that there's something more to me than my physicality. There's something more to me that when my physical being ceases to be alive, that there's something that continues to exist. And he's getting at the idea that freedom, decision, responsibility, and knowledge, my exercise of those things is what helps me to become humane, right? And so if you would put that within then a theological, spiritual context, then it is my exercise of freedom within belief as a son, daughter of God. The decisions that I make that help me to reflect that supernatural reality. The responsibility of being in that filial relationship with God the Father through Jesus Christ, and my knowledge of what that means for me and for others, and again, my mission, as we talked about the apostolate not too long ago, that all this is what helps me to be human. This is what helps me to be fully what God has created me to be. Okay? So now I ask you to be patient, because this is dense. That little quote is very dense. It covers a lot of ground. And I would ask you to consider this, again, within the context of a response to the implications of the gospel proclamation of Christ risen from the dead, and the teaching of our own future resurrection. This gospel announcement, by implication, puts forward the immortality of the soul, as well as the understanding of the human person as a whole, consisting both of my physicality and the immaterial parts of myself, my soul and my spirit. And this is that's essential to me. I am my physical being and my immaterial being. That is me. And I think at times we forget that. We forget, as I said earlier, we forget the supernatural aspect, right? So then those of us who believe at this moment in history don't really think about the soul's existence. It's almost a given, or it's something that people don't even believe in or even consider, right? But within the Catholic culture, it is something that's just kind of presupposed that there is a supernatural life and that there is existence beyond and above my physical life. But a given that has been built over centuries of pondering and understanding. We take it for granted, but this is something that took a long time to come to fruition. Again, this quote also points out that we exercise our freedom to become. And part of that becoming is in our response to the understanding of the gospel that is offered to us. He said, man is what he makes of himself. We return then to our responsibility to exercise our freedom, to educate ourselves, to catechize ourselves, and to make better choices toward our ultimate fulfillment found in our ultimate end, which is Jesus Christ, which is another way of saying, being in that filial relationship with God the Father through our adoption in Christ.
Yikes. Yeah. That is... Let's see if we can unpack that a little bit more. Because it is a lot, and there's certain distinctions that I think what's the guy's name?
Klinger.
Klinger is trying to make. So, and this very much seems to not be the spirit part, right? This very much soul,
Right.
as in the being, right? The essence kind of thing, not the animating force, but
Correct.
just the essence. So, I don't know, something that is just kind of, as you're saying, how this developed over hundreds and thousands of years kind
Right.
of thing. I do find it kind of interesting that, yeah, it is kind of in most atheistic philosophies, it's just kind of thrown out. It's like baby with the bathwater kind of thing. It's just like, no, we are materialistic, or we are material beings in a material world, and that's, or universe, right? And like that's all we are, and everything else, like consciousness, is an accident.
Material.
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds like some song in there somewhere. Is that Madonna?
Yes, it is.
That's so random. That pops into my head. Material Girl. That's the name of the song.
Yeah, it is.
Good side note in the Catholic podcast.
And it's a great video because I love the video because it's a.
I don't know if I've ever seen the music
It's a
video.
take on the Marilyn Monroe.
Oh yeah, I'll have to go
number that Marilyn Monroe did.
Yeah.
So anyway,
yeah, such a random
random
side
squirrel.
Yeah. Gosh. Okay, so where was I going? Oh yeah, so it's just thrown out, right? That's this thing that has took centuries and thousands of years even for people to
Think it
work out.
Think it out, yeah.
Yeah, and then that's so postmodern to be like, nope, we're more enlightened than that. We're just matter, and everything else is an accident of it.
Right.
So that's something that I just think is really striking, because I guess there's a lot of that going on nowadays too. I mean, just without going on another tangent, like the whole kind of throwing out of the value of marriage or nuclear families and all that kind of, right? It's like we're so enlightened that we can just make things up now instead of putting any value into the
end of
thought that came before. Yeah.
Yeah.
But going back to
Klinger,
this whole soul thing, it's
and it part of it too. Remember we were talking about the Irenaean theodicy,
Yeah.
right? That remember we talked a little bit about that. So the whole idea is like God has given me the capacity to participate in my own being, in my own, and by that I mean in the development of my own self. Which is amazing in that to share in that creative gift that God has given me. Like you can be, and I hate to use this because I hate this cliche.
But you're gonna do it anyway.
I'm going to do it anyway, because, even though I hate it, because it's a trite expression, but it synthesizes what I'm trying to get across. To be your best possible self, right?
Mm-hmm.
That thing, right? In a very deep way, and in a very deep way that trite expression cannot grasp. But the fact that, again, to exercise my freedom, and one of the things that made me think about, too, it was that if I am free, if I am truly free, even if I'm in prison or I'm oppressed, or whatever it might be, if I'm truly free, that historical circumstance or that event cannot touch my freedom. I might be physically, materially imprisoned, but I'm not imprisoned. I am free. Right? And that to me is such a huge thing. And what I'm thinking about is like, there are people that you meet that are very dignified, and they might be in situations of poverty. They might be in situations where they're being oppressed because of their faith, because of their religion, because of their language, because of the color of their skin, because of the historicity of whatever that might be, or whatever it is, right? That these people have been oppressed or are oppressed for being different, and yet to meet someone in that circumstance and situation who really understands faith and their relationship to God the Father through Jesus Christ, there is a dignity in the person that nothing can touch.
Yeah.
And to me, that's always been very, 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 very impressive.
Yeah, because their body may not be free, but their soul is, right?
Yeah. They know their freedom. They know that they're free.
Yeah. It is really interesting too how it seems. So I can see the Hebrew version of or the Jewish version of spirit, like this animating force, and then I can see the Greek thought of soul, which seems very much kind of like your, I don't know if ego is the right word, or your logos. Like it's like your mind almost.
The reason part, the logical part, right?
But the Greek version, does it make room for the spirit and soul, or spirit and soul, or is it the same thing?
The psyche for the Greek is the person, and so they would consider that the richness of that, right? They would consider the psyche as part of. There would be the pneuma, which would be the life principle.
So you still have some animating.
Yeah, there's an
force.
Animating spirit, but the psyche is the person.
Okay, yeah, and I because now I'm really curious to see what the Catechism has to say about this, but I do think it is so important and so very interesting that Jesus, when he was resurrected, had a body.
Glorified body, yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't just a ghost. He wasn't just a soul.
Right.
Right. And he demonstrates this, right? I'm hungry. Give me some fish. He wants to eat. And,
put your finger in the nail marks. Put your hand in my side.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting that, and obviously it was very purposeful to show that at the resurrection, if the resurrection is real, not just for him, but for all humanity, if there's life after death, it's not just a spiritual or a soul life after death. It's a physical life after death, too.
Correct.
So I think that's really something to help keep us grounded in not getting lost in the temptation that I'm just my mind.
Correct. Right, that dualist kind of thing. Like, and for example, depending on which creed you are praying, and which translation of the creed you're praying to. Like, I believe in the resurrection of the dead. I believe in the resurrection of the body. Right, and part of it is this, that when we proclaim resurrection of the dead, I'm just not saying the resurrection of my spirit, but of me as a person and my personhood.
Yeah.
When I was in seminary, seminarians being who we are, we would make fun of this idea, trying to grasp this whole mystique about it. We would say personhoodness dumb, and so it's the wholeness of that, right? Of personhood, personness. Persondom, right? Personhoodness dumb.
Hoodness stuff.
So
I like that.
that was what we were trying. There is something there, and the Catechism doesn't really say a lot, because again, this is a very big thing, and as we've talked before, the Catechism is just a basic text that should be used by local bishops to create their own catechism in their own way of forming Christians. So in the Catechism under Part 1, the Profession of Faith, Section 2, the Profession of the Christian Faith, and under Creeds, Paragraph 6, man, 365 to 368 on body and soul. 365 says, spirit and matter in man are not two natures united, but rather their union forms a single nature. So there we are one nature, body and spirit, spirit and soul. Number 366 says that the soul will be reunited with the body at the final resurrection. In number 367, the Catechism says, sometimes the soul is distinguished from the spirit. St. Paul, for instance, prays that God may sanctify his people wholly with spirit and soul and body, kept sound and blameless at the Lord's coming. The Church teaches that this distinction does not introduce a duality into the soul. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so is the I like that. Is it 366? No, sorry, 365. We're not two natures united, but rather their union form a single nature. That, I think, is, again, that's really powerful because it's really, I wonder, there has to be some postmodern philosopher that is so focused on, maybe it's Freud or something, who's so focused on the psyche, or that you are your mind and your body doesn't matter as much, kind of thing, because it seems like it breaks my heart, all the people who feel like they're trapped in the wrong body or something like that. It's,
right.
You're both,
right.
and the dignity and the beauty and the majesty that is who you are, mind and body together, is that those two things together is who you are.
Right, and I think part of it too is the fact that we have lost the appreciation of the profundity of what a human person is. Right. So yeah, we're not going to open that can of worms right now. Okay, so
yeah.
Anyway, this is something that is very important. Again, it's developed over time, over centuries. Great thinkers, everything from different cultures and philosophers and theologians within the Catholic culture. You can look up these people if you want. Athenagoras, Irenaeus. We talked about the Irenaean theodicy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Clement, one of the first popes. Origen, Gregory of Nyssa, part of the Cappadocians, made great contributions towards the development and understanding of the soul. Through their contributions, we have come to a point in our salvation history where we are coming to a greater reflection upon the unity of the human person as ensouled flesh or infleshed soul. That reality that is difficult to capture in words. Our present contemplation upon the reality of our being is focused on, or should be focused on, the eschatological point of our future, our resurrection, our union with Christ in the end of time. We are attempting to reflect on our being, not by focusing on the salvation of the soul, but its intended purpose or end in the death and resurrection of the Christ into whom we have been baptized and have begun this journey to that eschatological end. And by that I mean more and more theology is developing and spirituality is developing. We're not spending a lot of time about saving my soul.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about what is it that God is asking me to be?
Mm-hmm.
What is the purpose of my being, the fullness of my being, seeing that I am meant to live in union with Father, Son, and Spirit at the end of temporal history.
Yeah. Isn't that a little egotistical, maybe? What about me? What am I? Versus that relationship with God.
Right.
And I wonder if that's as much, or if it's as prevalent in the Eastern rites, because it seems like the Orthodox theologies allow for things to be mystical, and like we don't have to, define everything. It is what
Right.
it is.
Right.
Just let it be.
And part of it too is cultural and historical blah, 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 cultural and historical influences upon the development of our thought. Right. For example, again, post-Tridentine. Right. The church is so concentrated on reacting to the Protestant Revolution. Right. And then you've got your Enlightenment in the West, and the whole empiricism, and all these things that try to speak against the profundity of the human person. Yeah, they all are contributing factors to our thought process and our development, our history, right? And again, as we move away from the immediacy of the empiricism and materialism and these kinds of things, the church is being able now to reflect back on the richness of what it is to be a human person. And what does that mean within the context of the gospel, within the context of my supernatural life as a believer, right? So yeah, I think there's a greater development of that.
Yeah. So if you could, with all of your, I'm sure you've spent lots of time thinking in your life, how would you encourage somebody who also finds this very interesting, right? Who, like, what am I? Am I body? Am I spirit? Am I soul? Am I whatever? How would you direct them toward their understanding of, or growing an understanding of, what it really means? Yeah, right. Because we're going back to the realization of my supernatural self. So how would you direct somebody back to that, even if they can't quite define or accept certain definitions of things?
I think, yeah, that's a difficult question to answer, because I wish I could tell you, well, you need to go read this book.
Yeah.
No. Again, it's a cultural thing. It is an awareness. I think, for me, I would say there's several books that people can read. And again, I hate to recommend books because people have different tastes in books and styles of writing and stuff. But I think Christian philosophy, in the subject area of what we would call Christian anthropology, that would be reflecting on the human person within the context of the Christ event, within the context of the gospel, right? To help you understand that there is a richness in your life, that, and part of it too is the fact that we're self-determinate, as that's why I quoted Klinger there, is the fact that, wow, I can determine who I'm going to be. And by that, the who, right, is the fullness of that, right? I can choose to make better choices and to educate myself and to form myself and to be myself in my fullness, whatever that fullness will be for myself, or I can choose not to, right? For example, and a lot of it is the capacity, going back to what we spoke about earlier, the capacity to be self-reflective and to be objective. I remember when I grew up in the poor side of San Antonio, one of the little barrios, little ghetto, right? And it was interesting that one of my friends, as I was a teenager, I went to go visit one of my friends. I was driving, so I had a driver's license. So I went to go visit a friend of mine, and they lived in what we would call the courts, which was the projects, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they lived in the projects. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what the projects were. I went like, oh, look, they're apartments, right? So
Yeah.
I didn't understand the culture. But there is a culture of poverty, right? There's a culture there, not just of poverty, but there's almost a bubble and almost the inability to see that there's a way out of that situation, which I found interesting, right? And kind of amazing, because I was a little befuddled by it. And the fact that, okay, well, like, there's like multi-generations of people living in housing projects, right? Government subsidized projects. And it's not their fault that they're there, because they haven't been educated that this can be a point for you to gather your resources and save up so that you can better yourself and you can educate yourself and you can educate yourself out of this situation, or not be able to see that and continue the multi-generational poverty level, right? And so for me, it was like, wow. And again, it's not a judgment. It wasn't that. My friend was my friend, and we were close, and I loved his family, and we were, yeah. But it was kind of like, for me, as someone who tends to be reflective, I was kind of like, wow. So, okay. Single parent households, multi-general single parent households. Like, wow. And again, I bring that up, that as a paradigm for our own self. I mean, I can educate myself, form myself, catechize myself, and truly understand who I am called to be as a person, as a beloved son, daughter of God the Father through Jesus Christ. And the more I educate myself in that, the fuller I will be as a human person, which is what God the Father desires for me. But also, I will grow in my freedom, I will grow in my responsibility, I will grow in my responsiveness, my consideration of others. And so there's something there, right? Yeah. So again, and the reason I bring this up, again, going back to Christian anthropology, is I would say, do I have the curiosity to want to know myself better, or to know what it means to be a human person better, right? I think that's the key, right? That is the key. And praise God, there are plenty of those people in the church. And that is why the church keeps growing and developing. And we've grown out of the dark ages.
Yeah. And I think that reflects on what you'd said earlier in our conversation about the people who are free, and nothing can change that. If they can be in prison, they're free. They can be poor, they're free.
Right.
And that freedom, though, comes from that relationship with Christ.
Right.
And knowing who you are in relationship and through relationship with Christ. It's so good.
Go learn. Go educate yourself.
Get you to school.
Get you to school. Reading, writing, arithmetic.
Oh, well, thank you for this.
You're very welcome.
This is fun. And because this was a result of somebody asking some question, it very well could have been Betty.
Whoever it was.
Yeah, but whoever, thank you, whoever you were. But to everyone else, if there's something that you're thinking about, or you're curious about, there's that Google form. It's in the show notes down at the bottom, or you can shoot us an email. I think that's in the show notes too.
Right.
And just ask a question, and if it's something we can talk about, we'll dig in the best we can.
And Manny, I promise you, we've already talked about big T, little T. We're going to record that soon, so just hold on. Okay?
Hang in there.
Hang in there.
Yeah. And everyone else who hung in there with us today, thanks for joining us.
God bless. Thank you.
See you next time. Bye.